Last night we started on Daniel 2, the times of the Gentiles, and we had just really gotten started. Let's turn to the second chapter then, again, of Daniel. Daniel 2 and 7 are two chapters on the times of the Gentiles. And as we relayed last night, that phrase means the times when Israel will be under some Gentile power over them. Of course, today, you see where the question mark is? I'm sorry, I was just looking a while ago. Those that are behind the here are not going to be able to see, and I'll try to lift up. But the question mark here is the church age. Israel today is not under any Gentile power that is controlling them, governing them during the church age. The last worldwide empire that they were under was the empire that Christ died under, the Roman Empire. But their worst time will be when, during the tribulation period, when they'll be under a revived Roman Empire. We'll be getting in more to that tonight. So today they're not under any particular power, although, you know, United Nations supposed to have control over all the nations in its membership, but sometimes Israel doesn't much care what United Nations does. You know, they just go ahead and act, but they're still under the auspices, as we are too, of United Nations, which is not good for us either, up on the Hudson Bay up there. Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of this big old Rambo man. The Rambo's on that front side. And he didn't know what that meant. He knew what it was because it was his dream, but he didn't know what it meant. And Daniel interprets the dream, tells him what he dreamed, because that was the prerequisite that Nebuchadnezzar had with his wise man. And he told him what he dreamed. He knew what he had dreamed, but he wanted someone to tell him what he dreamed and give him the interpretation. And Daniel did so. And if you look at Daniel 2, 31 through 35, he tells him what he dreamed. And it was this colossal image, as you'll see. Then he interprets the dream, and here where we start tonight. He interprets the dream to him starting at verse 37. 36 says, "This is the dream. Now I'll give you what it means. So King Nebuchadnezzar," verse 37, "you art a king of kings." Why? Because the God of heaven has given thee a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Nebuchadnezzar was the epitome of despotism. He was a cruel, despotic, dictatorial type of a man. He wouldn't put anything in writing. It was just his word, which he could break in the afternoon if he made it in the morning. And he's reminded here that God put you up. And I think any national leader should remember that today. This is delegated authority. No man, even a dictator like Saddam Hussein over the Euphrates, or Fidel down in Cuba. Governmentally speaking, in the plan of God, God allowed a man to come up, and God could put a man down, as he did Pharaoh, as he told him, "For this purpose I have raised thee up." And God can allow a man to be over something, but he can put him down, as Nebuchadnezzar was. This is delegated authority. And you know, everybody except the Lord has delegated authority. We don't have intrinsic authority. No leader has intrinsic authority. It's delegated to him by some authority over him. Even our president, that's delegated authority. That's not intrinsic authority, although the presidential authority is within the office, but that's delegated to that office by voting a person in. Nebuchadnezzar was actually given this authority by the Lord. And verse 38, "Whithersoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thy hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. You are this head of gold." So he begins to interpret the rainbow image now to this king Nebuchadnezzar. And thou art this head of gold, which was the Babylonian Empire. Because the Babylonians loved G-O-L-D, gold. It was called the Golden Empire. Archaeologists have unearthed some remains of Babylon, and that there were a lot of lions flanking the boulevard that led up to Nebuchadnezzar's palace. On each side of the boulevard were lions made out of wood, overlaid with gold. In Isaiah chapter 14, verse 4, Babylon is called the Golden City because they love gold. And so thou art this head of gold. And that was the first worldwide empire that Israel has been under. When Nebuchadnezzar came and took Israel into the 70-year captivity, that started, as we said last night, that started the times of the Gentiles. And so thou art this head of gold. Look at verse 39 now. And after thee, this is prophecy. See, this is history pre-written. This unsaved man had this dream, but he didn't know what it meant. But a God man from God, told him what it meant. And so, in effect, this is prophesying that another empire would come onto the horizon. And historically, the Medes and Persians succeeded the Babylonian Empire. And verse 39 is a prophecy of it. And there was no Medo-Persian Empire during the days of the Babylonian Empire. After thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. Inferior. That's the Medo-Persian Empire. And then another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And that was the third one, the Grecian Empire. We'll come back to that. And then verse 40, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it be broken in pieces and bruised. And whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes of this image, part of potter's clay, part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay or brittle clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry or brittle clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings, that's the 10 toes of the rainbow, if you look here. In the days of these kings, those are the 10 kingdoms of the revived Roman Empire, the 10 toes here. See, Rome fell. See, Rome divided in the rainbow in these two legs. Rome split in the 5th century A.D. into a western and an eastern sector. Actually, religiously, they broke because of the iconoclastic issue. Icon is a Greek word for image. And there was a sector of Romans that didn't believe in images in their religious services. There was the other section that did. So that one section split and started a headquarters in Constantinople in Turkey. And the religious aspect of that is the Eastern Orthodox Church that actually does not have statutes in their churches. But the Latin Church, the Western Church, which is the RCs, Roman Catholics, they have images or statutes in their churches. So they split and in the 5th century. And so Rome is going to be revived militarily in a 10-nation confederacy corresponding to these 10 toes of this rainbow. And look what in verse 44, in the days of these kings, these 10, because the last thing we saw above there was the 10 toes. In the days of these, see, these refer back to the 10 toes seen above. So in the days of these kings, there are 10 kings, kingdoms, same thing, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it will break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. And you'll note, as we mentioned last night, in chapter 2 of Daniel, of course, Nebuchadnezzar saw this. He saw a stone rolling out of a mountain and hit the feet of this Rambo and destroyed the whole image, the metallic image. And this stone, chapter 2, 34 and 35, will become a great mountain that will, that will fill. Could most of you, if I move that on over here, you all might be able to see better, wouldn't you? That stone will become a great mountain. Mountain is a symbol for kingdom. As I mentioned last night, Psalm 37 and verse 4 mentions David referred to my mountain. That is his kingdom. And so this stone will become a great mountain which will fill the whole earth. That's the millennial kingdom, which will be the fifth worldwide empire. But it's not going to be human instigated or instituted. It'll be from heaven. It'll be instituted on biblical principles. Could you imagine a worldwide earthly kingdom that will be run by biblical principles? That's the millennial kingdom, which will be 1,000 years in length. As John says in Revelation 20, which is the millennial chapter in the apocalypse. 1,000 years of peace. Isaiah chapter 2 verse 4 says they'll not even learn war anymore. There won't be national armies during the millennial kingdom. It'll be a time of peace and justice and equity for all. And people will not be mistreated by civil authorities or by groups or organized crime, all these things won't be allowed in the millennial kingdom. There won't be the mafia. There will not be drug groups and drug addiction, that type of gambling. Won't be gambling, organized gambling during the millennial kingdom. Righteousness will cover the earth as waters cover the sea. And that kingdom will come as a result of breaking the military backs of this world. See, peace can only come by judgment. See, we've got a human philosophy, not only in America, but even in the United Nations, is trying to hobnob with everybody. Just like we are doing it with Red Chinese. You can't talk holding to one philosophy. You can't talk with a person that's diametrically opposed to you and think that you're going to conciliate matters by with two diametrical philosophies, like we're supposed to have, which we're supposed to have opposite of Red China. They have a different philosophy than we do nationally. Although I don't want even our own president to express what we should be philosophically, because I don't think he's got the right philosophy. That's just my personal opinion about our nation, you know. But we don't have any grounds for talking with Red China because they kill people, and take fetuses and use them. Even worse than what you and I could ever imagine. See, Peace is not going to come. We have the human philosophy that is by peaceful coexistence. You can't coexist with someone that's completely different than you and have a different philosophy than you. A peaceful government is going to come as a result of judgment. That's why that stone there is a symbol of judgment. A stone coming out of a mountain, falling onto an image, that's a picture of judgment. And that stone then becomes a peaceful kingdom that will fill the whole earth. See? That's the biblical philosophy. Peace can only come as a result of breaking the back of the enemy. You take back here, during the days of David and Solomon. You know why Solomon could reign in peace? Because his father brought peace by beating the enemy, hit their enemies, and then Solomon enjoyed an era of peace. Peace comes by war. And when we start cutting our military down, then we're opening ourselves up for enemy to encroach upon us. You know, there has to be a continuation of strength, military strength, for a nation to stand, not to let up on that where the enemy that is emphasizing the military come in and take over. And all that's seen right there. So here in chapter 2 is an unsaved man's dream, which he didn't have any idea what that meant. And it was interpreted to him of 4 worldwide empires, 3 beyond his own, that would come upon this world. And at the end of which, those empires would come to an end, and there will be another kingdom set up on this earth, which is the millennial kingdom. Now, let's turn to chapter 7 and look at the same thing, but under a different symbolism. See, chapters 2 and 7 constitute the times of the Gentiles. And by way of contrasting the 2 chapters, chapter 2 is the times of the Gentiles from an unsaved man's perspective. Chapter 7 is the same thing, but from a saved man or from God's perspective. See, chapter 2 was an unsaved man's dream. Chapter 7 is a saved man's dream. Chapter 2 was a dream by Nebuchadnezzar, an unsaved leader of Babylon. Chapter 7 is a dream of Daniel. If you'll note verse 2. Daniel spake, and I saw in my vision by night, and I saw 4 beasts rising up upon the great sea, the Mediterranean, around the Mediterranean area. And so in Daniel's vision, dream, he saw 4 animals. And you'll note verse 4, the first one was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. And I beheld until the wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. The last part of verse 4 refers to Nebuchadnezzar being put out to pasture for 7 years because he was lifted up in pride, and he went mentally berserk, and instead of being sent to Morganton or Butner, he was just sent out to pasture. You all know Morganton, North Carolina? That's above Hickory. Lucy and I are from Hickory. She's from Hickory, and I'm from way out in the country from Hickory. But Morganton is the place where you go when you don't have everything up here. Lucy and I wanted to go to Holiday Inn in Banner Elk or Boone one weekend when we had a weekend free, and we want to get away and call the 800 number, because I wouldn't call long distance. It had to be 800, I wouldn't call. Rather drive there and spend two tanks of gas to find out the same thing, right? You know, that's saving a lot. So we had 800 number, and I called 800 and said, ma'am, we want to stay in Banner Elk, North Carolina, or Boone in the Holiday Inn, because I love that pepper steak in Holiday Inn. She said, must have been a highly tourist weekend or something, holiday weekend or something. I forgot now when it was or what it was. She said, there's not a room in Boone nor Banner Elk in Holiday Inn. Oh, she said, that, by the way, there is one in Morganton. I said, ma'am, we're from Hickory, which is 30 miles away. And that's all I said. I knew she didn't get the point. Because anybody in Hickory does not want to stay in Morganton. You know. And of course in Winston-Salem, on the east of us is Butner. So actually we're in between Morgan and Butner. So it depends on just where you go. You go east, you go to Butner. You go to west, you go to Morganton. Nebuchadnezzar went berserk in chapter 4. And he was lifted up in pride and he was put out. That's what the last part of verse 4 is talking about. But you'll note that as you turn over to the backside to the 4 animals, or if you look here on the chart, if you can see it, you'll note that the lion has a set of wings, as verse 4 mentions, had eagle's wings on it. Of course, you know this is symbolism. Wings indicate flight. Anything that has wings can supposedly fly. And the reason of course, a lion does not have wings. We know, of course. This is symbolism. See, these 4 animals are symbolic. Just like this Rambo of a man is symbolic of worldwide empires. These animals are symbolic of the worldwide empires. So Babylon is said to have a set of wings here. The reason for it is because the Babylonians moved their troops real fast. Not as fast as the Greeks, but they were known for rapidity. They marched their troops and didn't give them much rest. Isaiah mentions that when Israel returns back from Babylon, that they would not be able to move like the Babylonians moved, because the Babylonian soldiers, they had forced marches. They weren't given much rest. So the Babylonian troops, they did move fast, and that's the reason for the wings on the lion here. But the lion represents the Babylonian Empire. If you'll note the chapter 7, the lion there is same as the head of gold, because the lion here, as we just mentioned a while ago, Babylon was known for pictures of lions, even on buildings, insignia of lions on buildings. And I just referred to Nebuchadnezzar's boulevard that led up to his palace had lions made out of wood, figures of lions made out of wood, overlaid with gold. They didn't have wings there. But overlaid with gold. They love gold. Gold. And so the lion is the same as the head of gold here, the Babylonian Empire. So here we get an additional thought here that they move their troops fast. Look at verse 3. Excuse me, in verse 5 rather. Behold, another beast, second, likened unto a bear. And it raised itself up on one side. By the way, on this, we have it upright. But in the biblical thing is on one side. The bear is on one side. It was on his strongest side. The bear represented the Medo-Persian Empire. The reason for it, Daniel seeing it on one side, was that one side of that coalition was stronger than the other side. That was the Medo-Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire, the Persian aspect of that empire was stronger than the Median part of it. So the bear on one side represent that it lay on its strongest side. What side do you all lay on when you go to sleep? What side do you lay on? I go to sleep on my left side. Not that that's the strongest side. I just go to sleep on my left side. And then I about 2 o'clock in the morning, I turn on my right side. And then get up again, and then I'm on my back. And then after that is an elbow on the side, you know. If you get on your back, you start with something that starts with an S, and the second letter's N, and it'll drive you crazy. So something got to give or stop. So an elbow on the side stops everything. But the bear on one side indicate one side of that coalition was stronger than the other side. And by the way, if you like we call it the Medo, M-E-D-O, Persian, hyphenated Persian Empire, the Persian element was stronger than the Median element, as I just mentioned. Like, for instance, if you go to the book of Esther, Esther married a Persian. And in the book of Esther, chapter 1, instead of Medo-Persia, it's Persia-Media. Persia-Media, rather than Medo-Persia. Because that Persian element, as I said, was stronger than the Median element. And when we get to chapter 8 in a moment, we'll note that the ram has two horns on it, and one horn, though, came up last, and it was higher. The one horn came up first, then the second horn that came up second was higher than the first horn. And that's the Persian Empire, we're going to see in a moment. Because chapter 8 relates two other animals to these two kingdoms. So the bear represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And, of course, the bear was the insignia, national insignia for the Medo-Persians. Just like the Russian bear today is the symbol for Russia. I don't know, since Russia split up into republics, I guess the bear is still their symbol. Like the Persians was the ram, but the Medo-Persian was the bear thing. The Greeks were the Macedonian goat, the goat, as we're going to see in chapter 8. And actually there's a sea over there called the Goat Sea. It's the Aegean Sea. It's built on the Greek word goat, the Aegean Sea. And the dragon. And so these animals represent national insignias. And so the bear here is the Medo-Persian Empire. And on one side, represented one side was stronger than the other one. If you'll note in verse 5, it had 3 ribs in his mouth. And as you can see on the back side, 3 ribs in his mouth. That was, in other words, it had consumed 3 nations. And those 3 nations would be Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt, that went into a coalition against the Medes and Persians. And the Medes and Persians beat that coalition. And of course, you know, the Medes and Persians took over the Babylonians, but they also beat the Egyptians and also Lydia. And those are the 3 ribs in the mouth: Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. And so that empire consumed those 3. Verse 6, after this I beheld, and lo, another likened unto a panther or a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. And the beast had also 4 heads. So if you'll see here on the chart, this leopard, it had 2 sets of wings, 4 wings. The lion only is depicted as having a set of wings, but the leopard is depicted as having double wings, 2 sets of wings, which indicates further rapidity. And that's true. In chapter 8, the he-goat is pictured as not even touching the ground. That's the Grecian Empire. And that is not without significance, because Alexander the Great, who conquered 11,000 miles from Greece to Egypt, from Egypt to India, and from India back to Babylon on Euphrates River, where he died a drunken mess at Babylon when he was just about 32 years of age, about the same age our Savior died on the cross. Alexander the Great moved his troops the fastest that of any general up to that time, or probably since, except for General Patton in World War II. I mean, the Greeks moved faster than the Babylonians moved. And so this leper is depicted as having 4 wings, or 2 sets of wings, indicating even greater rapidity than even the Babylonians had. You'll note that it has 4 heads on it. 4 heads. Of course, this is symbolic of something, because an animal does not have 4 heads, except for those in the state fair. Yeah, they may have 4 or 5 heads, but real animals don't have but 1 head. I've never seen 2 heads on a deer, have you? But this animal has 4 heads. Why? Because the Grecian Empire, 20 years after Alexander the Great died, the Grecian Empire was divided into 4 sections with his 4 generals. See, turn over to chapter 8 and I'll show you that. In chapter 8 there are 2 animals, as you can see here on the chart, the ram and the he-goat. And look at chapter 8. Daniel said, verse 3, that I lifted up my eyes and I saw before the Hoyle River a ram that had 2 horns on it. Now note now, one of them's going to come up last. The 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the higher one came up last. As I said a while ago, Media took over the Babylonians, but the Persians amalgamated themselves with the Medes, and they were the stronger of the coalition. So much so that in 2 Chronicles 36, it's just called the Persian. Media was not even listed. And in the book of Esther, as I just referred to a while ago, it's called the Persian Media, rather than the Medo-Persia, Persia Media, because that element was stronger. These 2 horns represent one side of that coalition was stronger than the other side. It came in second, and it was higher than the other. Note verse 5, as I was considering this, I saw a he-goat coming from the west. And of course, the goat was the symbol for Greece. As I mentioned a while ago, the Aegean Sea is based on the Greek word goat, the goat sea, the Aegean Sea. And so the he-goat is a wild mountain goat that came out of the mountains of Greece and came to the east and hit the Medo-Persian Empire, Alexander the Great. We're going to see him in a moment now. And it came to pass in verse 6 that he came to the ram that had 2 horns. That is, the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire. The he-goat is the Grecian Empire. See, Alexander the Great's father was Philip of Macedon, who was not able to consolidate the warring tribes in the mountains of Greece, but his son was a military strategist par excellence. He consolidated all these warring tribes in Greece into a mighty army and conquered the world. He spread the Greek language over the whole known world at that time, for which we are thankful. He prepared, see, this is before the New Testament started. This was during the intertestamental period. This was before even Christ was born on this earth. The Greeks had already spread the Greek language. Wherever he went, he spread the Greek language. So that by the New Testament time, then the Greek had become a universal language. And of course, our New Testament was written in Greek, you see. So the Lord used some of this, to prepare for the writing of the New Testament. But note now, this he-goat rams into the ram. That is, Alexander the Great and his war machine hit the Medo-Persian thing over on the Hoyle River, which is over toward the Euphrates, that area in there. What happened? Verse 7, I saw him come close to that ram, and he was moved with choler or anger against him, and smote the ram, break his 2 horns. That would be the Medo-Persian coalition. Break his 2 horns, and there was no authority, no power in the ram to stand before him, the he-goat. But he cast him down to the ground, stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and he was strong, and the great horn was broken. And up then came four notable ones, four notable horns. The big horn, if you'll note here, as you all can see, the he-goat. It had a big horn between its eyes. That was Alexander the Great. And when the big horn, not the little horn now, little big horn, that's where General Custer met his Waterloo. This is the big horn. When the big horn, which is the first Grecian leader, when big horn was broken, 20 years later, four horns came up. Now let's look at the interpretation of these two animals. Look over at verse 20 of our 8th chapter. The ram that thou sawest, having two horns, are the kingdoms of Media and Persia. And the rough goat, the he-goat, is the kingdom of Greece. Grecia or Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is Alexander the Great, the first king. By the way, when Alexander the Great came from Greece, if you look at the land of Palestine on a map, up north to your left is Greece. Alexander the Great came from Greece down through Palestine, and he's going to put Jerusalem to the ground. When the priests saw the army coming in to Jerusalem, the priests went out and met Alexander the Great and showed him the scroll of Daniel. This is historically true. Showed him the book of Daniel, which was a scroll, not a book like we have. And showed him what we now call chapter 8. And showed him that he was the first king of Greece, which he knew he was. He was so elated over the fact that, even though his name is not mentioned here, but he's mentioned as being the first king of Greece, which he certainly historically was, because he had no predecessors at all. And because that his position was shown to him as referring to himself, he was so elated over it that he bypassed Jerusalem, went on to Egypt and conquered Egypt. And by the way, you know, there's a town down there that's named after Alexander the Great. It's Alexandria, Egypt, which back in the first 5th centuries of the New Testament time, it became one of the intellectual centers of the world, with Athens, Greece, as being another intellectual center. And Alexander, Egypt, was another center. They had a school there, a city there that had a library that had 70,000 volumes in it back then. And there was a school that started in that area. It was liberal. It spiritualized Scripture, but it was an intellectual center. And from there, of course, as I mentioned a while ago, Alexander the Great came out of Egypt, back up through Palestine, which he did not put down to the ground, and went over to India, as we just referred to. Note in verse 22, when the big horn was broken, there came up stood up for it. 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of that nation. And so forth. So 20 years after Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was divided among his 4 generals. And that's the 4 heads on this third animal here, which represents the Grecian Empire. Note in chapter 7, let's go back now hurriedly. Chapter 7 mentions the 4th beast. And in verse 7, and this I saw in the night vision, behold, a 4th beast. You'll notice not even named. It was dreadful and terrible. It's an animal, it's a beast, but it's not named. You'll note verse 4, the lion is named. 5, bear. 6, leper or panther, which is the fastest of the beasts. A leper can run faster than a lion. And of course, a lion can run faster than a bear. A bear can trudge along pretty good, about 20 miles an hour, even in a mountain terrain, can it? And if you men that hunt bear, you know, they can move pretty fast if they want to. But they're not as fast as a deer, but they can go along pretty good. But the leopard is the fastest of these animals. But you'll note the fourth beast is so terrible it's not even named. You'll note here, it's a terrible beast. It has symbolically, it has great iron teeth. And it has claws. And what it does not eat, it will trample. Iron claws, it will trample to death. What it can't eat. That's the Roman Empire up here was the iron, which is a strong metal, you know. The Romans were known for iron swords. And so this fourth animal has great iron teeth. And it stamped it devoured and break in pieces, and what it did not consume by the mouth, it would stamp the remainder. Residue means remainder. What it would not eat, it would stamp the remainder with its feet. And it was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns on it. As I was considering the horns, behold, there came up among those 10 another little horn, before whom 3 of them were plucked up by the roots. Look on your handout at the back. You'll note this fourth beast in its latter stages that has 10 horns on it. It has another little horn in between its eyes. You see a little white dot there. That's a little horn. In deer hunting, you know, that's pretty short, isn't it? Is it acceptable if you can hang a ring on it up here in Virginia? You know, if you put a ring on it, it's legal. That little horn is a person. In the end time, Rome is going to be revived, as I mentioned a while ago, in a 10-toed or 10-horn coalition of nations. And it's going to have a leader. The difference between chapter 2 and chapter 7 of the times of Gentiles, Nebuchadnezzar saw 10 toes, which were interpreted by him, by Daniel, as being 10 kings in the days of these kings. But Nebuchadnezzar did not see the leader. Daniel saw the leader. And the little horn in Daniel 7 is who we call in the Johannine epistles as the Antichrist, who will be in the tribulation period, and militarily he'll be the leader over 10 Western nations. See, in the end time, militarily speaking, this world is going to be divided up into 4 confederacies, commensurate with the directions of the earth. There's going to be a northern confederacy. See, directions in the Bible are in relation to Palestine, not Christiansburg, but Palestine. North in the Bible is north of Palestine, etc. In the tribulation period, there's going to be a northern confederacy of nations. Daniel 11 mentions all 4 of them. Last part of Daniel 11 mentions the Antichrist with his group. There's a southern confederacy, a northern and an eastern confederacy of nations. And all these 4 confederacies of nations will converge into the land of Palestine in the tribulation period. And the Antichrist will be over the western group of 10 nations. See? And tomorrow we'll speak more about the Antichrist, so we're not going to get into it tonight because of our time also. But chapters 2 and 7 then constitute the times of the Gentiles. And it's already mapped out. It's already mapped out. God prophesied in Daniel of 4 worldwide empires. And we've already had them. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. There's one more facet of it, though, that's still future. Will it be just like Daniel 7 says so? Yes. There's going to be we haven't reached the toes of this image yet. See, we're in the church age here. We're in the church age. We have not reached this time or this portion of this image. Nor have we reached a time when there's going to be 10 nations in the West headed up by one man. Who are these 10 nations in the West? We don't know who they are. Only Van Impe knows those 10. You know. But we don't know. Of course, he knows. Just ask him, because he knows everything. You all know Van, don't you? We don't know who the 10 nations are. We know that we're a Western nation. Canada is a Western nation. Britain is. Germany is Western. France is. NATO. How many nations in NATO right now? Offhand, I don't really know. I know that there's some Eastern Balkan bloc, Eastern nations that are going to be brought into NATO. But even if NATO had 10 nations in it right now, which it has more than 10, but if it had just 10, that doesn't mean that they are the 10 in the tribulation period. See, we don't know who the 10 would be. But anyway, the 10 will be 10 Western nations. I would hope that the United States will be part of that 10, because if we're not, if we're in existence, we'll either have to be with Russia and that confederacy, or Red China, the kings of the East, and with that confederacy, or Arafat's confederacy, the Arabic confederacy, which Egypt is a part of that in the end time, or we'll be still in the West if we're in existence. I hope we'd still be in the Western Alliance, you see. But one day, whatever these 10 nations are, there's going to be headed up by one man. We're going toward that, folks. In our country, we're going toward losing our liberty, national independence. Right now, our soldiers have to wear what kind of insignia? United Nations insignia? One of our young men, refused to wear it, and was he court-martialed? We're going toward amalgamation, and I hate to see it. I hate to see our country lose our national distinctive and our national independence. We're kowtowing to even other foreign situations even now. We love our country. We want our country to be distinct from other nations. And I don't want to be merged into you, but evidently if we're in existence, we're going to be merged in to one of these confederacies, and I hope it would be the Western Confederacy. And have a leader over it. Of course, we're not going to be here. We're not going to be here. See, the rapture, of course, we don't show it on this chart, but the rapture is before these 10 toes ever, or the 10 horns ever will form. We're going to go up to heaven. And all saved peoples will go up. And if you're here tonight without the Savior, if Christ were to come, you wouldn't go up. You would be left for this period of time, and you'd see it too. In 7 years, you'd see amalgamation of 10 nations in the West, and you know who the leader would be. He'd be an antichrist against Christ, but you'd know him. We don't know who he is, because he's not presented on this side of the rapture, except in prophecy, and he's not even named. But the prophetic time in which he makes his debut is not in the church age. He makes it in the tribulation period, which we won't even know who he is. But you might know if you don't know Christ as your Savior. Because you'll live beyond the rapture if Christ were to come in your lifetime. This period here is 7 years. And these 10 toes and these 10 horns was the same thing. 10 nations in a revived Roman Empire with a leader called an Antichrist over these 10. And you know who he is. And if you still retain your human your humanistic philosophy that you have, if you're an unsaved person, that you're a natural person, you would swallow that economic regime hook, line, and sinker. Most people will. Most people will. There'll be people saved during the tribulation period, but boy, it'll cost. It'll cost. It'll cost. Because the Antichrist would kill you if you trusted Christ as your Savior. If his police could get a hold of you, he'd kill you. But there'll be those that he won't be able to kill because Christ is coming before he could do away with everybody that is against him. But it'll be hard to live saved in the tribulation period because of his program is against that. Aren't you thankful that you live during the church age where you could be saved and join a church, a good church, and make your life and put your life there and make your life count for the Lord? And if you're saved, you're supposed to be in a church and be a member of it and be a part of that work and give your life and your work there. Laying up treasures in heaven. The New Testament does not know of an unbaptized and localized Christian. The New Testament does not know of a person that's just floating around, from church to church. The epistles were written to a group of baptized believers. In that group, they would meet together. They knew each other as members. So make your life count. It's easy today. I'll tell you the truth. If you don't know Christ as Savior, you be in this time, you're not going to be able to meet. You might not be able to live if he can kill you. You ought to thank the Lord that you live. You ought to thank the Lord that you live during this time here. Period of grace. And we have the freedom in our country to worship at the dictates of our hearts. Father, thank you so much for your word, which tells us in advance